Okay, so you probably know that we have been going through this book called Extended Mind. And the author is Annie Murphy Paul. She's a psychologist. And this is the field that this is, represents is called Somatic Psychology. And the word somatic is body. So it's psychology, it's how the mind interacts with the body. And it's a fairly new area of psychology, and it's quite amazing because, we've all, especially those of us that have gotten degrees and, had a lot of education, we've learned to pay attention to our thinking, to what's in our minds, with the logical, analytical ideas. But it turns out that our whole body participates in thinking and learning and remembering. And when we become aware of how our environment influences what we think and what we feel, we're using our abilities to a much greater extent. We've talked about the kind of gut level feelings that we get way before we understand things. And if we tune into those gut level feelings, the fact that we know much more quickly than we would normally know what the right decision is, what the right choice is a big factor in success very often in many occupations. We've talked about using gestures when we talk and how that amplifies, how that increases the meaning that we're conveying. We've talked about how when we are active, we're not sitting in a chair, which we all are right now. We're not walking around. But when we talk with people, when we think and we walk around, our brains work like 40% better. Who knew? We do know. I mean, we've experienced it, but we haven't thought about it. We haven't purposefully said to ourselves, oh, I need to think I'm going for a walk. Or we need to think together. Let's go for a walk. We don't think that way, right? We sit down and have a cup of coffee, which is okay. But if we walked, our thinking would be a lot better. We've talked about how being in nature amplifies our sense of peace and of oneness. And that too relieves anxiety and helps us to think much more clearly. We've talked about the room that we occupy and the way it's furnished and how neat it is and the way it's built, how indoor space and how it is configured and how it feels changes our way, our ability to think. So today we're starting to talk about how the people that we're with add to our intelligence when we're thinking. And the first people that we're going to talk about is experts, people who have done something amazingly well. And how something that we've been discouraged from doing, imitating masters, shortens our thinking time and dramatically increases our odds of success. Sabrina, you work in archaeology. So you are very aware of old, ancient ways of education, I'm sure. You know, how like the Greeks educated, how people in the 1700s, what kind of schooling they got. And up until recently, the mid-19th century, mid-1800s, schooling was about studying the masters and really studying them so you know how to do what they did. And then in the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution, the factories started to produce multiple copies of everything. And the idea of starting out by imitating a master engineer, a master builder, a master writer, a master artist, got much less attractive because we were, sort of inundated, buried with copies of everything. And so copying went out of style. And teachers said, we don't want any more copies. Do your own thing. And so we've all grown up learning to do our own thing rather than memorizing and repeating and copying, right? When you studied art in school, for instance, you weren't shown a whole bunch of art pieces and told to copy them. That's how it used to be a couple of 100 years ago. But you were told, draw what you want. And the more different it is, the more original it is, the better. That was true for me. Was it true for you? Anybody? Sabrina, how about you?
How about me? About
Yeah, when you were a child in school.
Yeah.
Did you spend a lot of time copying and memorizing?
I have some memories, I think.
Okay, memorizing means you learn it so that you can repeat it word for word, like a poem or, a piece of writing.
Memories, can you repeat, please?
Yeah,
Memories?
memorizing. Let me put it in the chat.
Memorizing?
Let me put the word in the chat. It's not the same
Memorizing,
thing as
like if you are taking examinations, then you need to study early learning to memorize some words or vocabulary so that if the time of examinations, you can ready for it. That's it, Teacher Rosemary, that you mean?
Yes. When you memorize something, you can say it without looking.
Yeah.
And that's how you get tested. Can you repeat what was written exactly as it was written?
Yeah. I think when I'm a child, I don't have problem with memorizing, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I
But
think, but for example, right now, if I want to memorize something, for example, I try to watch, for example, a video or listening something, explain what I want
right.
to memorize or what I want to understand, and I think with it's worked for me better than to read or I think it's my method.
Yeah. And that is the more modern approach is, okay, learn what it means, see somebody doing it, but understand. And then you don't have to use the exact same words,
Yeah.
but you know the process, right? That's a more up-to-date, more 21st century way of learning. But in the process, I'll get to you, Blanche, in a minute. In the process, we have kind of thrown out the idea that memorizing directions for something or memorizing what somebody wrote is useful. And to me, this chapter made me realize, oh, I should not throw that out. I should actually think about doing it because I'm likely to get a good idea faster that way. Okay, Blanche, what did you want to say?
When you were talking about, there was a time we learned by the masters and watching them and seeing how they do it and then how it changed. And it made me think of, with me, with teaching. I didn't go to college, but I had worked with children. I was certified to teach in New York and DC. And the state board would come and watch and observe me. And how I learned was from working as an assistant teacher. And he actually started in high school as an aide because my senior year I had all my classes. So they said, well, you have to be in the environment. So I went to the elementary school and was a teacher assistant. So I learned from the masters.
Cool.
And didn't have to go to college. And it was observed over time. And I had to come up with original lesson plans.
Right.
I would make original games and stuff.
But you knew how to do that, not because you'd studied it in a textbook, but because you had been with teachers doing that.
And observation and even learning early childhood development. And because then the children were masters, learning to deal with them,
Right.
you know, the psychology and understanding certain behaviors at certain age. And I learned nothing from a book,
Right.
but was still certified. It was like an apprentice, like back in the day when everyone was an apprentice.
I bet you can't do that anymore.
No.
You have to learn it out of a book.
Right. And there's some people who, like you said, learn that way. And even better, because some people don't have good memories. There's some people who just can't memorize what they call rote learning. We give it to you and you give it back.
Right. Yep. But what this chapter made very clear is there's an important kind of learning. So I'm going to share my screen. So what it really addresses this idea of observing and rote learning and really learning by observing what people did and making sure that you understand it is the question of how do you get to original thinking from imitation. And the surprising finding of research on this question is that it's a way faster route to mastery than learning things out of a book and rote learning. So that's, it's interesting to see that acknowledged and explained, I thought. So we all are wired. Every creature that learns, including people, we're all wired to imitate. Children always, they're always imitating people. And that way they learn really quickly how to do things. And this little kid is learning how to walk thoughtfully, holding his hands behind his back. Just like the baby elephant learns how to walk next to its mom. And I'm trying to get rid of the pictures here. Okay. Or for centuries, art students still, you go into one of the great museums and you'll see people with an easel set up and they're painting, they're copying what somebody else painted and looking at their brushstrokes and looking at how they composed the picture and looking at how they did the faces and how they did the body. And by copying it so that this one isn't yet, I don't think, a really good copy, but that's the goal, is to make his picture or her picture look like the one on the wall. And when you accomplish that, you know how the master did it. And then you can apply that knowing when you want to create an image of people. You know how so-and-so created their images. And as I said in the introduction, people got really tired of copies when there got to be so many copies of everything. So teachers now really kind of scorn imitation. They look down on imitation. They don't respect it. So they ask learners to start out with a new thought. And we can be creative doing that. But it turns out that if we also study what really brilliant people have done in a certain way, we can get there a lot faster, because all we need to do is take an idea that's worked and apply it to the situation that we have. And it goes a lot faster than making it all up. So when we explore, even in books, how a previous genius did something, anything, we're learning from the best teachers, the people that succeeded. And it's very effective. So when you start out by imitating somebody, there are three important benefits of that. One is, when we look at what's already been done, we're actually sorting through the options. You know, how can you do this kind of thing? And that means that when we decide to start something ourselves, we choose a model that's proven to work, and we shape it according to the situation we're in. So we're much less likely to fail because we're doing something that we know works and that has been shown to work. And then by examining precedents, which are examples of what came before. So Sabrina, for you and your study of ancient cultures, you may discover a brilliant idea that could be imitated today with excellent results. But when we do that, we see a wide variety of possible solutions, and we can start out ahead of the game. We start out by choosing one that is very likely to work in the situation that we're creating a solution for. And finally, when we copy, when we start out by imitating a genius, we can steer clear of the errors that somebody else already made. We don't have to make them again because we've got a model that doesn't make those errors. So we can build a better solution. And this is really true in every aspect of life, in medicine, in business, in engineering, whatever. And also, I might say, Blanche, for you, for the children's education program, you know, what's the best, the most popular children's education program around? Find
Yes.
out what those kids like about the program they'd rather go to.
Mhm.
Because
I'm
if-
going
if
to
you-
observe some. That's what I'm
Yeah.
going to do.
And ask them, why do they want to go to this other place?
Right.
Because that means that the other place is doing something that works.
Uh-huh.
And it's okay to imitate.
Yes.
And the interesting thing that the statistics show is that the imitators in business outperform innovators, people that start off from scratch. Those that are imitating somebody else are at least 3 times more successful than people that start out from scratch. And a couple of examples are Timex watches. You know, I don't know if you have Timex watches where you are, but in the US, they're in every store. They're really common. Everybody knows the brand name. They're cheap and they work, right? But they weren't the first cheap workable watch. But they were the imitators. And they imitated another watchmaker and did it better. And so they became the famous brand. And another example they gave was the replaceable razor blades. It used to be that you've seen old-fashioned razors, right? With the knife blade that had to be sharpened. Well, a razor with a replaceable blade was a better idea. And there was a replaceable blade before Gillette, but Gillette's the big brand. They're the ones that took the idea, made it better. Ford in the US was the first automaker that sold cars to everybody because they did the assembly line and made cars much cheaper. But they weren't the first automakers that used the assembly line. Henry Ford observed what probably French automakers were doing and did it better. And he's the one that made the fortune on it. You know, this kind of observation is true in most fields, that the company that followed somebody who'd done a pretty good job with a product that still had some problems were the ones that really succeeded. And another interesting twist on this was that in sailboat races, you couldn't really see what the guy ahead of you was doing. But if you could get into the lead, sailboat captains learned that all they had to do was look back where they could see what the others were doing and imitate everything they did. And they stayed ahead. So they won the race. So it doesn't matter where you find the better idea. You just have to do it. Another example of industries that are copying other industries. Airliners, you have to admit, have gotten pretty good at avoiding accidents. It's really unusual for a plane to crash. now. They've learned how to deal with all different kinds of weather conditions, how to go around weather conditions. They've learned how to check everything via a list before the plane takes off. And so everything gets tested beforehand, before you take off, and then if it malfunctions, it'll cause the plane to crash. They're now saying that that Indonesian plane that disappeared 2 or 3 years ago, that the pilot actually was trying to commit suicide and took the plane off the radar and then did a U-turn and went someplace else. But that's unusual. Most errors are now found before a plane takes off. And healthcare doctors began to realize, oh, wow, our record with surgeries is much worse still than the record of the airlines. We still make all kinds of mistakes and kill people. And so hospitals are working really hard to duplicate the pre-checks that the airline industry mandates, so that a surgery does not begin without everything being checked and double checked. And I don't know if you've been in or near a hospital recently, but they are now using electronics too. So they have these scanners and they scan to make sure they've got the right patient. And then if they're doing surgery someplace, they take a marker, you know, a pen that writes on anything. And on the part that's going to be operated on, they say, here. And on the opposite part, like if it's your left elbow, on the opposite elbow, they'll say, not here. Seriously. So you're all marked up with magic marker if you go into surgery. And those are some of the common mistakes that have been made. I mean, imagine if you're going to have, you know, a part of your body removed and they took off the one on the wrong side. You know, that's a major problem. So the healthcare industry is now imitating the airline industry to improve their track record. So 3 steps to successful imitation. 1, identify your problem and a similar problem that has successfully been solved. 2, analyze rigorously why the other solution that already exists was successful. And here they gave the example of Steve Jobs, the Apple guy. Before he started building Apple computers, there was a computer that already existed that was doing reasonably well. It was called Xerox. They started building computers and they were awkward to use, but they were successful in the market. And Steve Jobs wanted to make a computer that ordinary individuals could use. And the Xerox computer was for, you know, professionals in business. They were business computers. So Jobs looked at the Xerox computer, which nobody's ever heard of nowadays, right? It's like the examples of the watch and the razor that just disappeared. But Jobs looked at what they were doing, figured out what would work from that solution in the solution in the market that he was considering, ordinary people computing for their own purposes. and he adapted. He didn't invent a computer from scratch. He started with one that functioned and changed it so that it would work better in the situation he was thinking of. And his innovations became Apple computers. Has everybody on here seen an Apple computer or a Mac or heard of? Yeah, they're all over the world.
Yes, they are.
He was a good example of somebody that took a workable solution and made it better.
Mhm.
And it was way faster than starting from scratch to build his own original computer. When we're copying, we get better over time. We try and we try and we try and we work on it, and then we compare. So this child's drawing of a butterfly, if you look at the two of them, they've got some surprising things right. Right? Like what? What do you notice that this kid observed and got right?
The shape.
The shape, yeah.
Mhm.
And the fact that the butterfly wings have two parts on each side.
Mhm.
I had not realized that until I looked at this drawing and looked at the butterfly wing, and I went, oh my God, yeah,
But the
this
butterfly
kid
has
observed something important. What else is
different
right?
color, teacher.
What?
The different colors.
Okay. Well, I thought that the colors were kind of different than this butterfly. I don't know what butterfly this kid was looking at.
The body part in the middle and the
Yeah,
end.
the body part in the middle. And what else about that body part in the middle?
The antenna.
The antennae, yes. And one more thing, the kid generalized it, but it was another interesting observation of
The
a
little,
real detail. Huh?
the little dots.
The little dots, yeah. That's so interesting. Again, I didn't really notice the little dots when I was just looking at the butterfly. But when I looked at the kid's rendition, whoops, sorry, he got, you think, wow, there's a big difference between them. But the kid observed some really important aspects of the butterfly and copied them. And if he were going to design his own butterfly, he would have a good starting point. Another thing that we know about kids and about animals in general, certainly mammals in general, we are hardwired to imitate other people. We start very young. This kid is older than hours old. This kid might be, 3 or 4 months, maybe. And that's when they really start imitating. But there are documented cases of kids who, if an adult is looking at the kid and goes like, baby will do the same thing. If it's just born, it knows, oh, I can do that too. And it starts to imitate.
Mostly
And
teacher,
I don't know.
children.
What?
Mostly teacher, the children now has a good imitator regarding for the young adult.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but it is so much fun doing what this guy is doing with a little kid. You laugh and they laugh. And before long, the two of you are bursting with laughter together and you feel so happy. I mean, you and this kid who's so little are communicating. You are on the same wavelength. You are with each other. And it is so much fun. If you have any child that's younger than a year old, anywhere from like 4 months to 10 months before they start to speak at all. And you have the opportunity to laugh with a little kid. It is awesome. And so, you're engaging in communication, in imitation. And it's fun because you and the child doing the same thing and being in the same energy. It's just totally amazing. So to sum up, there are very good reasons to learn and create by imitating experts. And here, children are indeed experts on what they know. And it's fun to imitate each other. They do it with you. It's fun when you do it with them. So even though many modern learners are not encouraged to do this, to learn this way, it's a good idea to add imitation to your learning and problem solving toolbox. So you start out ahead of the game.